We're going to need the APTIM people in front here to quiet down a little bit. It's a little rowdy. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to session 3. By far the best of the day, but I'm a little biased. But no, we have a really solid group of presenters and also a very solid spectrum of treatment technologies and contaminant types. So you're going to get some meat and potato remediation action right now. So my name's Chad Northington. I get to be your host today. So we're going to begin with a little journey on creosote remediation at a former wood treating facility by Merrilee Palcic. Got it? All right. With JEA. She joins us as a PE from JEA today. So see, we got a few more people. Come on in. Give you guys a minute to get seated and come on up, Missy.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Is that better? Sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me for my creosote remediation project presentation. Like you mentioned, I'm from JEA. I've been there for 2 years. Originally started at FDEP Northeast District for 18 years, and then moved to the City of Jacksonville Petroleum cleanup for 5 years, and now I'm at JEA. So I get to work on all my former projects as a JEA employee now, which is kind of fun. So get started. We're going to talk about our Kennedy generating station. It's a site on the Terracon River in Jacksonville, Florida, where we have one of our generating stations there. And we're going to be specifically talking about the southern parcel to that station, which you see in the overhead view here. Again, my name is Merrilee Palcic, go by Missy, and there's my contact information if you need it. Oh, pull it down, okay. Is that better? Okay. Just an introduction to our team members. We have JEA, myself, Alex Glass, Matt McClure, Jacqueline View. WSP was our design engineering firm and our engineering of record with Kevin, Todd, and David McDaniels. And then we had APTIM as our on-site quality assurance team with Greg Deaver and Charles Dees. And then Intact was our construction personnel that won the bid and actually did all the implementation for our site. And Mitch and Edgar Longstreet were the two main people there. The historical site usage, I'm sorry, this is kind of small, but it was a wood treating creosote operation back when we had railroad ties and piers and things that we put in the river. It moved to a creosote storage facility after that, and then after that they moved the storage facility off-site across the street with a pipeline running on our southern boundary to the docks for creosote unloading. And then we took the parcel over when we needed room for our wastewater treatment plant at JEA. And question? And there's kind of the picture of the site as it was way back in the day when we were doing wood treating. Oh, we were not doing wood treating. Somebody else was doing wood treating. Is that clear? And that's kind of the gist of what the wood treating site looked like back then. Due to historical site usage, we took the site again as wastewater treatment storage. As we were building the wastewater treatment plant on the southern parcel, we found creosote. And that started a long history of site assessment, consent orders, more site assessment, corrective measure studies. Just to note that we had a DER consent order, that's the precursor to DEP. Then we had an EPA consent order, and then we had currently we have a RCRA DEP consent order that was signed in 2006, and that is what we've been working under since then. So just to give you an idea, we went from assessment to creosote, to corrective measures implementations. We put an interim groundwater control, hydraulic control on site to protect the river. In between all of that, Q up till today, in the last year, we had corrective measures implementation and then construction completion, which is what I'm going to talk about today. So years and years and years and years of assessment and more assessment and just going through the consent order process. So here is the site before we initiated the work. The southern parcel, you can see, there's some blue areas there. We had a dredge cell that the Corps, when they deepened the Talleyrand, the river next to Talleyrand, they put their sediment spools in our dredge cell A. That was, so that's was existing when we started the work. And just a lot of wooded areas, just really not really much use of a site other than our wastewater treatment system out there. And I do want to make note, because this was brought up earlier about RCRA sites, the entire area, you can kind of see it outlined in red there, is an AOC, an area of concern, defined by RCRA. That's important when we start talking about what we're doing with the stuff within the site, because we start moving things around, and it's an AOC, an area of concern. So here's our soil contamination data compiled through years and years of data with mostly arsenic and PAHs on the site. Those are our two main contaminants of concern. We did traditional soil boring, some Targost sampling, and just, hundreds and hundreds of soil data out there. And then for remediation, we had some corrective measures that we looked at: institutional controls, engineering controls, monitoring, capping, removing it, disposal of it, in-situ stabilization. We decided for the soils themselves to do some off-site removal, bring it to site, cap it, and then put some stormwater management controls for non-contact stormwater, and then do institutional controls with engineering controls as well. So that's just for soil. And then groundwater data, a little bit more expansive, arsenic being the main driver for groundwater on our site, and then some PEHs as well. Again, hundreds and hundreds of data points to get our groundwater area that we know of. And for groundwater, we looked at, of course, institutional controls, just letting it attenuate, recovery, treatment, solidification, barrier walls, slurry walls, hotspot treatment. We decided to just continue the operation of our interim hydraulic control system, and then use, capping and things like that to prevent, leaching through the soil and things like that. So, and then monitoring, and of course, we will be closing those with institutional controls as well. And last but not least, we have sediment data. We have sediment contamination from years and years of creosote treatment and offloading and onloading. There was a bunch of ecological risk studies done way before I got there. The cleanup target level was determined to be 8.6, but we can't feasibly remove all of that. So our sediment remediation, we looked at a couple things: caps, passive caps, active caps, and what we decided was hotspot dredging to areas that after 20 years we have, I guess, a groundwater, a sediment model data that will shows it will be below 8.6 milligrams per kilogram after 20 years. So that's what we based our sediment on. So continue, and here is the sediment areas of the river that we were looking into. And continue on. So here's the summary of what we did out on the site. We had dredging, we had LDA hotspot removal for some really contaminated soil on site, some shallow source removal, a CAMU, which was a contaminated media unit, corrective actants management unit, sorry. It's a kind of a big landfill, a RCRA landfill. So we're gonna take all of those LDA and sediments and put them in a lined landfill on the site, was the plan for those. And the shallow source removal would just be put under an asphalt cap. We would relocate those just to under the asphalt cap. We have sheet piling and some riprap for the bulkhead that we wanted to put in as well. Closure turf, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's like a big green golf putting type material that really works good for erosion control, and we use that. And then of course we had stormwater management systems we put in for stormwater, and then our groundwater monitoring system or hydraulic control had to be rerouted and moved around to accommodate our CAMU and our cap. So I just want to make kind of like highlight, it looks like kind of a list of things that we did, but on the site we were doing dredging, LDA, shallow source removal, sheet pile installation, all at the same time. So it was just it was crazy. It was, so much going on at once, and it was just, we had like I think 9 months to get it done, and it was just, it was like a crazy clockwork situation, but that's our summary. So we'll start talking about the sediment hotspot dredging. As the figure here shows, we based our CAMU design on the amount of sediment and LDA soil that we were getting out of the river and the ground. I'll show you some pictures. This is some pictures of our dredging. How it worked is we would dredge the sediments out, bring them over to the site. We would dewater them on a barge. The dewatering effluent was sent through our pretreatment system, which was a permitted system from JEA, treated and then discharged to our Buckman wastewater facility. I will make note that as we were doing sediment removal in Area 1, I believe we hit lime rock at 1 foot. We were supposed to go to 2 feet, could not go to 2 feet because we weren't going to dig up lime rock. So that made the volume going into our CAMU less. It becomes important later on when we're building our CAMU. But we did not remove as many sediments just because, we didn't know the lime rock was there. We hit it and it's like, wow, okay, good to know. But, and then this is our LDA removal. It's kind of an area where we did our LDA as we were taking up really, really contaminated soil, and that was also going to go in the CAMU with our sediments. Also to note here that there were some areas that we could not get to depth when we were doing the LDA. When the Creosote site left and went across the street, they raised everything and just kind of buried everything on site. So when we were doing our LDAs on the southern portion of the property, we were hitting tank foundations that nobody knew that were still there. So we were limited on how deep we could go in the LDA areas as well. Also, a problem when you've designed CAMU to take LDA soils as well. So that. And here's some pictures of our LDA work that went on. It's really interesting if you get a chance to see that. It's a neat process. And then shallow source removal, mostly the 2 to 3 feet below surface, mostly for arsenic. There was a little piece off-site that we did dig up as well. We brought all that back onto site and cut and put it under our asphalt cap. Again, mentioned we're working in an AOC area, so that's okay. We can move stuff around within that AOC area, which is one, benefit of being in a RCRA site, but it can be. And there's some pictures of our shallow soil removal. Not the best, but you get an idea of how big it was and how extensive it was. And then our Corrective Action Management Unit, this is our CAMU, in orange is where we put it. And what we ended up doing is we took the LDA soils and the sediment soils, and in the yellow area there, this is our dredge cell A. We used a portion of that site to mix all of the sediments, LDAs, with some cement to try and dry them out before we put them to CAMU. And then we took all that and put it in the CAMU. Now, because we didn't take as much sediment or LDA soil out, we actually had to put in clean backfill to bring the CAMU back up to design, because we were basing everything off of volume, so we ended up with a lot more clean fill in there than we were hoping. So that was kind of an interesting field change, not field change almost, to seeing out there like, oh, what are we gonna do? We're gonna fill it up. And then there's some pictures of our CAMU. We're lining it, filling the CAMU, and then we put a top liner on that as well. That's all underneath our asphalt cap. I will say that during September, we had a huge rain situation going on, which made filling the CAMU and keeping everything in the CAMU dry while we were trying to fill it and line it and cover it. That was something that was unusual for that time of year, but Intact managed to do it, and we got it done. But another interesting note is that in the CAMU itself and the soils below where you were building, there's a lot of old wood debris. So we ended up doing a field change to put some vents in our CAMU top, which you might can see in the picture later on, but just to make sure that any of that stuff degrading doesn't affect the liner of the CAMU and everything, and doesn't affect our landfill unit and how it works. So, and then we have the sheet pile and cap design. That was on the sheet piles on the riverside. It's kind of hard to see, it's a little purple line there. Field change on that. The original plans called for a nice, beautiful curve around the riverbank, and it was beautiful on paper, and we got out there, and they're like, we can't cap the sheet pile wall with curve. So we did angles. So that was kind of an interesting thing. So you don't think about it when you're like, oh yeah, you really can't really curve the caps of that. But we used vinyl sheet pile out there for the corrosion, so it's a little bit, it flexes more than the caps did. And then the cap design itself, you can see the overlay here. The green is the stormwater management feature, and then the rest of it is where the asphalt cap and all the soil was brought into, that wasn't put in the cam, it was put outside in that capped area for that. And then there's a picture of the sheet pile going in next to the river. And then we had closure turf and sod areas because we were building up the site quite a bit to get all this soil in there and build the CAMU because we didn't want it below the water table. There's quite a bit of slope now going from the top of the cap down to the river. So we ended up using the thing called closure turf, which is like a plasticky kind of grass thing, but it looks really good with erosion. And you don't have to mow it, so that was really nice. And mowing a slope on the river was not something our Kennedy crew was looking forward to having to do. But other places were grass, where the stormwater pond is, that's designed to be grass, a dry pond. And then some of the swells on the western side as well did need the closure turf. But there's a picture of a closure turf. It's going in, it's got a liner on it, and then the people that put it in kind of like almost seam it together, so I'm not quite sewing it together, but then that's what it looks like on the right once it's all in. And you can see some of our recovery wells that we removed and put back in on the closure turf there as well for our hydraulic system. And then stormwater management features, because we were building a whole new site, well, not building a whole new site, but doing work on a new site, we did have to get a stormwater permit. Biggest thing was we had a stormwater pond and our swell that's on that side of it. And it's all non-contact now. They're all lined, and so that none of the stormwater that flows into it reaches our creosote. And then it discharges to our north ditch, which is up on the north there. And another field change that we did, originally designed, the north ditch was supposed to be a concrete slab built in place along a ditch with a tidally influenced swale. So think about how you would even do that. After some talks with DEP and getting some of their approval, we actually changed that to a lined swell with a riprap, which was a lot easier to install and a lot easier to maintain. So that was a big field change that we did. And let's see, anything else? There's some pictures of our north ditch. Our south ditch, we just lined and put the riprap there. None of the stormwater discharges to the south ditch unless it just happens to land on the south ditch. And then SMF1 was our big stormwater pond that we put there as well. And wow, 8 minutes left, so pretty good. So, and I think questions are for later, so feel free to ask, and I'll try to answer as much as I could. Thank you.
Yeah, I did mention earlier, we are going to hold the questions to the end, so write them down so you don't forget them, but I'd prefer everybody get their presentations in, then we'll circle back. We should have plenty of time, it looks like. So Missy got through it fast, and you didn't know that bringing up closure turf after my golf game yesterday was a really sensitive subject for me. So anyway, so our next speaker, Mr. Brett Bohentin, did I get that right? Almost, so close, sorry, bud. So he's a project manager with the APTIM. He's got a good crowd here supporting him in front as well today. So he is going to be talking about kind of the other side of some remediation, like some of the logistics and business operations, how they're impacted, some of those things that we miss sometimes in our design side of things. So, sir.
I paid all of them to do that. So thank you so much. Kind of had the idea, the conversation I had with my boss a very long time ago, and reminded me because I bumped into him on the way in. For half of my career, I was spinning out in the field, and so every time I would go to a facility and say, "Hi, I'm Brett. I work for APTIM. I'm going to do this today," and they go, "That's great. How are you going to affect my business?" Now that I'm in the office designing remedial systems, talking to the client, they go, "That's great. How is it going to affect my business?" So it's something that's been consistent across my entire career, so a lot of it may sound like common sense, but I feel like it's something that needs to be said. So that's what we'll do, and taking a lot of those considerations, we'll look at a project example that was successful. So our syllabus for this, again, we'll talk about disruptions and impacts, some things that are out of our control, some things that we can control. Give those considerations. We'll kind of discuss those a little bit. We'll talk through our example project, and then we'll look at the ending with our conclusions and some takeaways. So the disruptions and impacts, let's start with the ones that we can't control. All right, so these are seasonal. A lot of things are out of our hands. Take, for example, a store that is at the foot of a mountain. It's going to be very, very busy during that winter season, right? That's strategy. Same thing as a store that's on a barrier island. It's going to be busy during spring break all the way until the snowbirds hit. And then when the snowbirds come, it's still going to be even busier. So a lot of things that we can't control in those high flow times for the business. Second's the weather. We've all said it before. No one can control the weather. I remember with Katrina, going to Louisiana, one of the main things they were talking about was all the refineries being shut down. So the process of developing the oil then at that point was going to be significantly hampered. We're Floridians. We know the impacts of hurricanes. A lot of things when you get that storm update where it's okay, it's going to be here in 3 days, and that's pretty much impossible to get any fuel at a gas station unless you're willing to wait in line for hours. Same after the storm passes, but at that point, people are trying to not only just refuel for their generators, but also getting those supplies that they need. So it's more of a lifeline thing. So the next will be global events. Again, things are out of our control. COVID-19 was a good example, but also you can also look at conflicts, say in different countries that may have a control over an item that's part of our major supply chain. So if it's any equipment, maybe even fuel. Lastly, vehicle accidents. Say we're working at a store and someone takes a wrong turn, bumps into it, oops, that dispenser's knocked out, well, that entire facility is taken down. Same thing with any small fuel spill that may be a large fuel spill, things are taped off. We can't control that. What we can control, though, is what we do a lot of, and that's remedial construction. So taking those considerations, you want to look at how's it going to affect the business, all right? Am I going to block an entrance, an exit? Am I going to block dispensers? Am I going to block parking spaces? All those things that people ask for when you say you're doing a project. Because again, gas station makes a fraction of a cent off of every gallon that they sell. Everything that they're making money is inside the store. And that's your lottery tickets, your cigarettes, your drinks. My kids love cotton candy from gas stations. I don't know why, but it's the best thing. So that's where the money is. So if you're going to, say, do a remedial project, think about what you're doing to the business, whether it be large corporation or even small mom and pop. How many people have an app for their gas station on their phone where they get points? Everyone show of hands? Yeah, it's a big thing, right? Customer loyalty. That's what they're preaching everywhere you go. I want to keep that customer. I want to keep that customer happy. If I am set in my ways and I stop at that one gas station on the right side of the intersection every morning to get my coffee, when I show up and I can't get my gas because, oh, there's a construction project, the dispenser's a block, I can't find parking, I'm in a hurry, I might just go to the next one. I pass by it the next day, oh, same thing. Next day, same thing. This goes on for an extended period of time. My loyalty may shift to the second gas station. So when there's a big fight to keep your customers coming back, that can be an issue. So for risk, more of a health and safety thing, not just for the employees, but also for the customers. You know, we can set up as many fences as possible, but that doesn't stop people from possibly walking through. And I'm guilty of looking down at my phone when I walk, same with people. If I have heavy equipment that I'm using or a blade saw, say I have to cut across a trench and I think, oh, my concrete's 6 inches. Okay, I'm gonna get a 6-inch blade saw. But it's actually 4, and someone just happened to bury that product line a little too shallow. There's an issue there. So it's not more than health and safety, it's also could cause a bigger problem than we actually have. So the next one is where I need to walk a fine line between the PRP and the direct bill. So if you have a direct bill client, again, this seems more common sense, you're focused on their needs because it's hammered into you over and over and over again. If you have, say, a PRP site where you show up and that you don't have no ties, there's no relationship with her, you may not be inclined to take all of those considerations from your main client over to here. That person should be treated the same as someone that you work with every single day. Again, sounds simple, but there is that. And that's when the DEP and the responsible party relationship, the example is there, say I have a site, a PRP contractor comes out, I have no relationship with them, they're there for way longer than expected. Block interest is, I'm losing business, that's going to leave a sour taste in my mouth, especially if I have multiple sites where in the mail one day I get a letter saying, oh, it's the DEP, I'd like to come on your property to help clean it up. I'm going to be a little bit sour from the last time, so I may just kind of kick that down the road a little bit, delay that cleanup. There is that little check mark on the site access agreement that does say I would like to be part of the decisions going forward. How many people actually know what that means? So again, just considerations that we need to take in. So for an example project I'm going to talk about, I have a gas station in Southwest Florida, and I'm lucky enough, it's actually a large site, it's not a postage stamp. I have homogeneous soil, I have found that sweet spot. I don't have any clay, I don't have any limestone, it is sand all the way down to 35 feet. It's looking good, right? Shallow water table, even better. But then I have a petroleum race. Okay. I have soil impacts, I do have groundwater impacts. I have my VOAs, my benzenes, my ethyl benzenes, a little bit of PAH, some TRPH in the soil. But my main problem here is isopropyl benzene. So show of hands, who remembers, I think it was 3-4 years ago, there was a presentation specifically on isopropyl benzene? Anybody? Show of hands? Awesome. Okay, well you learned something. One thing with isopropyl benzene, it takes a lot longer to degrade than say your typical B-Texas. So one thing you should take into consideration is that as well. Lower GCTL, very heavy, very slow to degrade. So the site's great, suitable for multiple technologies, timeline, cost, everything's looking good. Every engineer is salivating at the thought of an air-sparge system at this point. You got everything you could possibly need, right? So here's my site. Nice, large site. I'll take those any day I possibly can. There's my building, and there's my soil plume. Pretty substantial. This is the leachability. Sprinkle in a little direct exposure here and there and make it interesting. Here's my well network and my groundwater plume. Again, just localized to 2 wells, but that's a pretty substantial difference between the two. Again, homogeneous soil, high water table. Still thinking about the air sparge system, right? But now my problem is all there, underneath the canopy, where everyone's gonna go get their gas. And if I do anything to block that, I'm potentially affecting everything that happens in that building. So, what we chose to do, and by we, Jim Martin is in the front row right here. He had a very good idea, and we moved forward with it. If I wanted to do trenching for an air sparge system, I'm definitely gonna do a lot of trenching, blocking driveways, blocking dispensers. Trench plates are great, but how long can I leave those there before they can possibly be an issue? So, what we decided to do is do a chemical oxidation. We partnered with Interex, with hydrogen peroxide, with their reagent activated by a synergist. We had 8 direct push locations scattered beneath the overhead canopy in select locations. Had 2 different intervals here. We had a 2.5 down to 5.5, and also a 12 down to, 5.5 down to 12. We installed 4 permanent injection wells if we needed to come back at a later date, as well as permanent lateral wells to where we could do some gravity feeding. So what we proposed, there's 2 events. The first one was in April of 2024. We injected 1,650 gallons of our mixture into the direct push locations, the injection wells, and gravity feeding. We waited 90 days, took our samples, looked at it, things are going pretty good. Came back for our second event in January. This time we didn't use the direct push, so we were able to even reduce our footprint even more. And we injected directly into the injection wells and our lateral wells. With this one, we used 1,100 gallons of our mixture. Again, having to wait 90 days for everything to fully function the way it needs to. And again, here's our map. So on the left side, you can see the location of the lateral wells. You can also, well, they're not circled, but you can get a look at where the 4 injection wells are spread across. And then on the right side will be the direct push locations. So, how did it go? And show of hands, any Curb Your Enthusiasm fans here? Pretty good, right? So, as the red line, that is kind of what we estimated as far as how things would look from our baseline. So after the first event, significant decreases in both our source well, which I'm call MW4, and also our perimeter well is MW1. Can anybody get a good look at the numbers? Okay, still looking good, still definitely a lot better than what we originally proposed. So the results after our second event, even better. We dropped down below the GCTL for our main problem, isopropyl benzene in MW1. slightly above the GCTL of 0.8 in MW4. We actually have, I believe it's 5.8. Very drastic considering where we were at our baseline just a year and a half before. So a lot of progress just in 2 events, and right now we're currently working through with the DEP of moving the site to PARM. So conclusions and takeaways, how does the project affect the business? So what we looked at here again was, where's our contamination? It is directly beneath the canopy where everyone's gonna come get their fuel. And talking about it again, all the questions are you gonna block my driveway? How many pumps are you gonna block? Everything that's gonna keep people from coming in and spending money in my store. That was compared to, say, an air sparge, and what we did see, I'm not gonna use exact dollar amounts, but about a third of the cost doing the injections as opposed to, say, a standard permanent air sparge well system, and actually a shorter timeline to clean up. Again, all those things were taken into consideration, potential revenue loss from the store, the loyalty, and the time savings as well. Whereas opposed to it may take a couple weeks to install that permanent system, we were on site for 3 days each event. Takeaway, kind of what can I do? Again, it seems common sense, but just kind of reiterate it. Work with the owner, treat them like your family, treat them like what sells in the store is gonna put food in your mouth. Work on construction staging, maybe work in certain areas where it's not gonna be busy at certain times, but a big thing is communication is key. You can't over-communicate in something of this matter. So if you like this, you may also enjoy, there's an interesting paper I was able to find there that does kind of touch on the issues that we talked about with issues out of our control. And oh, look at that. There's that isopropyl benzene presentation from about 4 years ago. So again, Chad, you said we'll hold off on questions until the very end. So thank you for your time. Thank you.
I guess our speakers really want to get to the reception and drink some beer because we're moving right along here. So, but we will wait for the questions to the end, so we should have plenty of time to discuss all this. Our next speaker, Dr. Mike Lee, is joining us from Terra Systems. He is the VP of R&D, right? And we're going on a permeable reactive barrier journey, sounds like.
So we're going to change the focus a little bit, and we're going to look at permeable reactive barriers to treat nitrate and phosphate discharges to surface water. I'd like to acknowledge my co-authors, Tim Pack and Dick Raymond from Terra Systems, and Paul Dombrowski from Isotech Remediation. So eutrophication, and I'm sure that a lot of you are in Florida are really familiar with this. It's an excessive plant and algal growth due to increase in nitrogen and phosphorus. So it can be from a point source, can be non-point loading of nutrients. The environmental impacts include dense plumes of noxious, foul-smelling phytoplankton, can limit light penetration and impact the growth of submerged aquatic vegetation, can result in elevated pHs and anoxic dead zones due to the decomposition of the algal mass. So this is focused primarily on Cape Cod, where we did these projects. But it's also going to apply to other areas, such as here in Florida, where you're trying to deal with groundwater plumes that are taking nitrate and phosphorus into surface water bodies. So you're trying to intercept that flow of nutrients. So the bacterial reactions in the septic systems, and that accounts for 85% of the wastewater treatment on Cape Cod. It's transformed to organic nitrogen and ammonia and then to nitrate. So you have large dilute plumes that flow into coastal waters, resulting in eutrophication, which leads to poor water quality, loss of habitat, aesthetic and economic impacts. Denitrification, it's a well understood process used in wastewater treatment. The bacteria convert nitrate to nitrite to nitrous oxide, nitric oxide, and nitrogen gas. So denitrifying bacteria are pretty ubiquitous in soil. They're anaerobic bacteria, so they operate when oxygen is limited. So we're trying to establish permeable reactive barriers. It's been used widely for treatment of chlorinated compounds, metals, and other things. So it's a permeable system where the groundwater flows through it. It's passive. You get reaction. So here we're trying to promote biological denitrification, and it's a barrier to permit nitrate migration to coastal waters. So there are a variety of compounds that you can use to generate the anaerobic conditions. primarily carbon substrates to provide food source and consume oxygen. Several different classes of compounds, soluble and quick release things such as sodium lactate, methanol, molasses, high fructose corn syrup. They're very water soluble, but they're also consumed rapidly and may be transported away from your injection location. And then there's slow release compounds such as emulsified vegetable oil, and that's what we're primarily going to focus on today. You can use lecithin, neat oil. One of the real disadvantages to neat oil, it floats and doesn't distribute very well. So we don't really recommend that. Those things are hydrophobic, so they typically will absorb to the soil. So they're not going to move as far as the soluble materials. And then the last class are solid products such as mulch, compost, and shells. So PRB installation, if you're doing a liquid carbon substrate, typically go into injection wells or by direct push injections. If you're doing a solid carbon substrate, it's trenching with an excavator or one-pass trenching, or you can also do small or large diameter boreholes that you fill with the mulch and compost. In some of the cases, they've also used emulsified vegetable oil to increase the distribution of the carbon or to regenerate those boreholes. So some of the challenges for PRBs, regulatory acceptance, and then the public concerned about are you injecting oil into the groundwater? Where the emulsified vegetable oil that we're talking about is food grade, so it doesn't have any real impacts on the quality of the groundwater other than you're generating reducing conditions where you may lead to increased iron, and often you'll get sulfide and iron precipitates. So one of the concerns for PRBs is the migration of the oil and impacts into the surface water, and then permitting. So in some of these situations, you're trying to treat groundwater down to 70 feet below ground surface and may have fast groundwater seepage velocities in coastal areas with permeable soils and high fluxes of nitrogen and oxygen. If you're doing this in a highly developed area, you need to have access. That's one of the advantages of the injectable material. You can stagger your locations a little better than if you're trying to put a trench across somebody's backyard and they have a cable line. They're not going to be happy when you cut the cable line. So one of the big questions for PRBs is the persistence. How often are you going to have to rejuvenate? And then you need to understand the hydrogeology and the distribution of nitrate. On the right, you can see a representative site where we have nitrate concentrations down to 40 to 50 feet below ground surface. And then below that depth it becomes a clayer zone, and there's really less movement of oxygen and nitrate, and so you really need to focus on that upper zone. So these are 4 field demonstrations that we've done on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard between 2016 and 2020. They all used Terra Systems SRS-NR, slow release substrate. It's engineered to adhere to the formation. It's a larger particle, it's 5 microns. It uses an anionic emulsifier with a negative charge for better retention on positively charged soil systems. And we have 3 to 7 years of groundwater monitoring data after those injections. The first project is Orleans. Groundwater flow rates of about 0.2 to 3.3 feet per day, nitrate concentrations between 0.2 and 38, averages about 12 milligrams per liter. In November of 2016, was a 110-foot PRB that was 17 injection points, 10-foot spacing, and we had 1 and 2 rows of points to try to see if there was an advantage to better distribution with the double rows of points. And this was done between 36 and 70 feet below ground surface with about 11,000 gallons total injection with 2,600 gallons of the emulsified vegetable oil. And we also added 350 pounds of sodium bicarbonate. Many of these systems have relatively low pHs, and the denitrifying bacteria are probably inhibited at low pHs of, say, 4 to 5. So we wanted to bring the pH up. So the objective was to get a 3-year persistence. And then we realized that the groundwater flow was more complicated than we thought. We thought it was going south to north, and then we're actually seeing a good bit of flow from the west. So we added additional PRB to intercept the flow from the west, 110 feet long, 20 injection points, 10-foot spacings, and here we use 2 rows of injection. Again, about 15,000 gallons injection with 3,700 gallons of EPO. And we also added lactate as a quick release substrate to try to more rapidly generate anaerobic conditions with about 950 pounds of sodium bicarbonate. So during the injection, we really didn't see much movement of the EVO. During the injection, we have demonstrated persistence of over 7 years from the first injection in 2016. You can see a couple of the wells, or one of the wells represented. We see DOC concentrations, dissolved organic concentrations, up around 20 milligrams per liter, and we see the nitrate concentrations drop off rapidly. And we're generating anaerobic ORPs. So we estimated about 0.6 kilograms of nitrogen per foot per year, with nitrate concentrations between 10 and 25 milligrams per liter at that 0.25 feet per day. So we estimated a flux of 0.7 pounds of nitrate removed per pound of the EVO. So this just shows a slide on the left. You see the nitrate distribution in 2016, and then in July 2019, almost all that nitrate in the treated area is gone. Next project is APTIM. This was a little bit higher groundwater flow rate, about 0.5 feet per day. Initial nitrate of 0.4 to 38 milligrams per liter, average about 5. These injections were done in April 2020 and a 200-foot PRB with 21 injection points, 1 row of points, 10 feet spacing, and between 21 and 64 feet below ground surface. Here we add a little bit higher volume of the SRS-NR 6600, along with the sodium lactate and a mixture of sodium bicarbonate and calcium carbonate in a total of about 31,000 gallons. The sodium carbonate is much more soluble, about 90 grams per liter. The calcium carbonate is very low solubility, probably on the order of a milligram per liter or thereabouts. So it's going to provide a lot longer lasting buffer than the sodium bicarbonate. And in the top slide, you can see the upgradient location. Nitrate concentrations were started around 8 and then down to about 1 milligram per liter. And the next slide is about 25 feet down gradient. You can see the nitrate concentrations in blue and the dissolved organic carbon in red. See the nitrates come down and stay down for most of the time over that 2-year monitoring period. And then there's even good denitrification down at 50 feet from the injection point. And this is in the shallow zone. In the intermediate zone, around the 1 to 2 milligrams per liter in the upgradient location, and the good treatment down at 25 and 75 feet from the PRBs. Next project is Falmouth. This was funded through a 2019 Southern New England program grant from EPA. The town owned the product or property, and so the groundwater flow rate was anticipated about 2 to 3 feet per day. When we actually got out there, it was only about 0.15 to 0.25 feet per day. And here the pH was low, between 4.3 and 6. So we wanted to see in this particular project the impact of 2 different dosages, a low and a high dosage, try to figure out how long the material might last. So we had multi-level monitoring points and then also monitored secondary groundwater parameters. So the design, about nitrate between 0.3 and 28 milligrams per liter, again average is about 4.5. Multi-level points between 3 and 44 feet below mean sea level, 120-foot PRB, 12 injection points, There were two areas. Again, the 1 year demand was 6 injection points of about 1,100 gallons of the SRS-NR, 725 pounds of calcium carbonate, and then we have monitoring points upgrading it and downgrading it, or in the PRB, and then downgrading it 15 feet and 125 feet downgrading it. And then the 2 year demand injected about 2,100 gallons of the SRS-NR, again, about the same amount of calcium carbonate. Total injection volumes were the same, 300 milligrams or gallons. And then we have monitoring points upgrading it, adding the barrier at 17 feet and 64 feet down gradient. So the top slide this is the 1 year demand. In the June 2020 is before the injections, so you can see nitrate concentrations range up to 15 milligrams per liter. In those points, upgrading it at 15 feet and 125 feet down gradient. In November 2020, we're seeing a little bit of reduction in the well 125 feet down gradient, but really, it looks like the 1 year dosage was not sufficient. Although with May 2022, we do see good reduction in that well 125 feet down gradient at a fairly limited injection interval of about 5 to 15 feet below ground surface. The 2 year demand, again, similar graphs up. The June 20 is the pre-injection, up to around 30 milligrams per liter of nitrate. And then in May 22, almost 2 years later, we're seeing again good treatment at the wells 17 and 64 feet down gradient. And then the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute came back in June 25 and took another round of samples from more limited locations only at the up gradient and 17 feet down gradient. And we're seeing still good nitrate reduction in those that 5 to minus 15 feet, or minus 5 to minus 15 feet below ground surface. And then the final project is Martha's Vineyard. Here was a groundwater flow rate of about 0.6. Nitrate concentration is a little bit lower, average of about 2.7. It's a 100-foot PRB. One of the unique aspects about this particular project, it was 80 feet from the water body. So there was definitely concerns about whether or not there would be any impacts on the water body. If the emulsified oil makes it to the water body, it's going to turn it white. It's probably not going to have any real impacts on the water body other than a lot of the oxygen is going to be consumed. So this was a 1 foot, one row of points, 10 to 15 feet spacing, 4 to 22 feet below ground surface. And here was about 3,400 gallons of the SNR, 1,600 gallons. Okay.
Screen up here. Anyways.
All right, well, we'll just move on from this one then. Oh, there, okay, we're back. So these are the results. The black and orange lines are wells that are upgrading. So we're seeing nitrate concentrations vary a little bit, but not much really is happening there. But then in wells 22 and 33.5 feet from the PRB, we're seeing good removal of the nitrate. And this was one of the things that they did at this project was to look for accumulation of nitrogen gas. So they're measuring the difference between nitrogen and argon, which is present in the groundwater at a pretty constant concentration. So we do see that over time, we're seeing an excess amount of nitrogen being produced. So evidence that we are getting complete denitrification to nitrogen gas. We also looked some at phosphate absorption. There's really not an easy mechanism for biological treatment. I mean, you can get, like in wastewater treatment plant, accumulation, but we're looking here more at a precipitation type reaction. So we used 4 commercial products, And then we conducted column studies with soil and stream water spiked with nitrate and phosphorus. So on the left is the nitrate. So it's a combination of the SRSNR and that commercial product. We're seeing the nitrate being consumed within about 14 days. Nitrate concentrations in the influent range from about 15 down to about 5 milligrams per liter. With phosphate, on the right, we're seeing between 40 and about 10 milligrams per liter in the influent, and we're not seeing any phosphate making through the effluent. So this particular product looks promising for sites where you're dealing with both nitrate and phosphate. Terra Systems and Isotech and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute have done a denitrification PRB design manual. It's available at terrasystems.net and technical resources if you'd like to see more information about these kind of projects. So in conclusions, PRBs are going to have a smaller capital cost than sewer and wastewater treatment. You can address point and non-point sources of nitrogen with immediate improvements to groundwater quality. We've identified a promising reagent for phosphate absorption. We need to do a field demonstration with that product. The PRBs can treat nitrogen and phosphorus near the source, near the surface water, and at depth. It's a small footprint with disturbance largely limited to the installation. Minimal operation requirements or cost after installation other than monitoring. And it can be used in combination with other removal mechanisms. And it can temporarily meet treatment goals to cut down the amount of nitrate that's moving into those coastal waters while you're trying to build your wastewater treatment plant. Even when you install a wastewater treatment plant, depending on where you are, it's going to take many years for that nitrate that's in the groundwater system already to be removed when you take out that source. So in Cape Cod and on Long Island and other places, they're assessing locations in excess for PRBs between 250 and 2,000 feet. And I'd like to acknowledge the companies that did most of the work. Woodhull's Oceanographic Institute, ScienceWares, MT Environmental Restoration, AECOM, SMAST, the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth, and then also Verdantis, which was formerly ESM. And I'd like to take any questions. All right, thank you.
All right, our final speaker for session 3 is Mr. Derek Bizzaro. He's with us from AST Environmental. He's a senior remediation geologist. He's going to be covering a pretty broad spectrum here. It sounds like a silver bullet of sorts. You know, we got dechlorination, 1,4-dioxane, and PFAS. So I'm curious to see.
All right, taking us home here. Thank you for the introduction. All right, so yeah, this is a pretty good mixture, right, of several common and less common contaminants that we all may deal with across the spectrum. I will say the overarching driver here is obviously going to be the chlorinated solvents, which we talk about, but the 1,4-dioxane, which originally for this client, this site was discussed possibly just absorption. We did more than that. We actually did degradation after absorption. And then the PFAS component of this is just going to be absorption as well. So a couple takeaways. All the data, whether it's a numerical value or a model that I show you, is all going to be quantitative data, right? This comes from a soil or groundwater sample. This is not HRSC. I say that up front because you're going to see a lot of models that look a lot like HRSC data from this site, but they are not. They're all actual soil and groundwater samples. That was done because we can stoichiometrically calculate the product we're using, especially with the chlorinated solvents, to determine various ratios that have to go into certain subsets of the site. You'll see why we did that because of the size and complexity of this. We did select one product in the end to address all three, we'll call these classes you saw on that previous opening slide. Obviously one for CVOCs, we had to concern. The second was the 1,4-dioxane and then PFAS was the nice to have, but see what you can do with that kind of thing. So that was addressed through activated carbon absorption. The last piece of this is this was conducted under a performance-based contract with the client. They've decided to remain anonymous for this presentation, so you can direct all your questions towards me and my team. So here's our site. It's a large industrial site. It's been used for many years. Our big concern here is a TCE plume. We also have some PFAS and 1,4-dioxane, as I mentioned. But this building is going to remain in place for the duration of this remediation effort. Half of this property, which you see here to the east, is still a fully functional operating storage and transloading facility for chemicals. The building you see here in front of you was used for warehousing, offices, and repackaging of chemicals over the years. So we have in some of these areas known, even before we get into our site investigation where we did a remedial design characterization, before we even dive into that, we know we've got significant impacts of TCE. We're dealing with a clay, sand, sandy clay, depending on where we are. As I mentioned, the building's staying in place. It was almost completely gutted by the time we got involved there. However, we were still dealing with demo and rehab crews and also construction crews throughout the process. You also see there to the northeast towards the highway side, that's a several-lane highway. It's a major operating artery for this portion of the city that we're in. We had both some exterior or outdoor concerns, and we had obviously a lot of indoor concerns as well. All right, so here's our remediation objectives. Again, we entered into a performance-based contract for the site, so our first milestone, right, we set milestones. People like to say the word guarantee with a performance-based contract. Performance-based contracting, we typically set milestones. You have to get to a certain milestone to achieve an objective, to get paid and achieve success, right? So here, we went with one milestone for this initial phase. Phase 2 is underway currently, but in phase 1 here, we're talking about reducing TCE to less than 1 ppm. That sounds like a really gross number to use, right, in terms of, wow, to get to 1 ppm, but if you see some of the graphs that are coming up, you're gonna be like, all right, there was a lot of work to do just to get to even 1 ppm. Again, we also had the PFAS component as well here. They're looking for less than 1 ppt per liter in the ISO contour there as well. Sequestration, again, is going to be part of the evaluation, so they did look at several products up front, but we also had to concern ourselves with, in addition to sequestration, how and what are we degrading either abiotically or biotically in this process as well. So we move into the planning phase, right? So they looked at several different products here. We pitched the first one there, which is a product called CAT 100. This was to be a one-shot injection per phase to address all 3 of those categories of contaminant we were talking about. Different activated carbons were also considered. Additives to some of those activated carbons, all different sizes, were considered as well as also what we'll call either an ERD or an iron-based remediation process as well. In the end, they settled on using the first one because we could address all 3 categories of contaminant, again, in that one effort with one product. So here's a little bit about how we went about that. So we're going to start with a granular activated carbon. That's our absorption component. That applies to all 3 of our targeted classes that we're talking about here. For the chlorinated VOCs, there is some metallic iron in the product, so we will get some initial abiotic degradation of the chlorinated components we're dealing with. We then also have a biological component there. So that is going to be doing the heavy lifting throughout this entire phase, right? We're going to do essentially ERD on activated carbon. So as you go through some of the slides or as I go through some of the slides coming up, you'll see graphs which, if you were to take an ERD site that you've typically seen with, we'll say 1 to 10 ppm of CVOCs, and you just compress it and cram it together, that's what a lot of these graphs look like, right? You're truncating the time it takes to achieve essentially an ERD program. We do not, and I will say this, it's noted here on the slide, there are very few sites that we actually augment with DHC. There's a presentation that RPI did years ago with Aaron Peacock, who's unfortunately passed away. He was with Microbac Laboratories. He told us in one of our presentations one time that in all his years of working in the industry, he found 5 sites that he actually needed to augment with DHC to get the process moving. So again, we are not doing that here. We are adding kinetic additives and nutrients and the carbon to create a home and boost this whole process. All right, so let's look at the first step. So there's a lot going on the slide. So RDC, remedial design characterization. We conducted this with the client through a lot of soil borings, a lot of soil samples. Again, high density vertical profiling. Typically every 2 feet, sometimes in the presence of obvious or gross contamination, a subset on the order of an additional 12 or 16 inches of vertical resolution. We also had temporary wells and existing well networks to work with as well. So here's what that looks like. Again, this is all wet chemistry you see on these slides. So this is our shallow and deep soil at the site. You can see significant impacts along the roadway. And as we move through this process as well, you're also going to start to see some of those darker magenta colors and blooms expand. That is because we installed additional monitoring wells through that process, and a lot of the data in latter slides is being monitored through groundwater. So with that additional resolution, you're going to see the plume change as well from the initial upfront slides. Here's our supplemental. So this was the second phase of our RDC, some additional temp wells, soil samples, all added based upon that first phase of site characterization. Again, all of this was conducted both in and outdoors using various rigs of all sizes. We had a dolly rig, we had a 54 LT, we had a 7822, we used sonic in some places. We had a lot of work to do, and I'll show you why we did that because of the injection grid that was derived from it. Again, here's some of our cross sections from the site. You see it's not all, right, any good chlorinated site, nothing looks like as it should, right? It just goes every single different way. You never get something that makes a lot of sense with a chlorinated site, I feel like, but sometimes you do. I know that's a gross generalization, but here we're dealing with a lot of subsurface contamination. In some of these areas, it's got significant impacts. We have to do a lot of heavy lifting. So you can see based upon just 179 ppm as well, you're iron limited, right? If you're going to go the abiotic route. If you're going to go the biological route, you're going to be out there for a long time. You're going to be doing a lot of augmentation with kinetic additives and nutrients. So it's a very, very arduous process if you want to use one of those products. Again, why we used something that was combining those technologies throughout this site. Just some more notes there in the cross section on concentrations that we were dealing with. So we moved to the remediation process. I told you we were going to subdivide the site. Here it is in plain view. That's a lot of subdivisions. The reason we were able to do that was twofold. One, that whole remedial design characterization process was not just an optimization from a cost standpoint, but a performance standpoint, right? I need to add enough in certain areas to get the results I want. Why would I add stuff I don't in other areas? Unfortunately, a lot of these areas we had a lot of injectate, as you saw from the previous slides. But what we're looking at here is this overburden unit was completed all with direct push injection. We had a lot of square footage. Each of those color-coded grid dots is a subdivided area within a primary area. So I don't know, did I call it out on here, how many areas? I think I might have that in a different presentation, but we cross-section the heck out of the site is the best way to look at it. And so in some of these areas, the color code also changes because not only is it a unique area, but by depth, the loadings are changing as well. So in some instances, we're doing the shallow with one specific loading, and we're doing the deep overburden with a different loading. Again, we can make those choices and decisions based upon that in-depth remedial design characterization. There's the dividing line between what's exterior to the left and interior to the right. So you could see about 70% of the site was interior injections. Oh, good, I labeled it. I'm not good with animations on slides, as you can see. All right, so here's one of those points inside. Here's the dolly rig. Almost 200,000 pounds of Cat 100 injected here, and that's a combination of almost half of that being the Boss 100. The Boss 100 is an activated carbon-based platform with metallic iron impregnated into it. Just by itself, that would function as absorption and abiotic degradation product, but when we add in the additional kinetic additives to it, instead of expending the iron, right, through the generation of hydrogen and additional electrons, we preserve that iron and we use that product to absorb and then transfer electrons to degrade those CVOCs right at the site of absorption. So think of this as an electron pump in the subsurface. That's why this would be so successful when you're dealing with a site with ppm level or DNAPL type of concentrations. Again, in most every single instance, this slurry was injected on 2-foot intervals. And in some cases, we ramped this up to get lateral distribution in the subsurface of up to 35 GPM. One thing I would note, this is a true slurry. Contrary to popular belief, when we get into coarser materials with slurries, we have to ramp up the injection energies to get that either radial co-mixing, or if you're in very fine sediments, you'd be doing fracturing. But in coarser grained sediments and settings, we have to increase our flow rates and pressures because we're doing radial co-mixing. And you want to reduce the instance for formational straining. And we increased that as we started to near the top of fractured bedrock. As we got into what we call a transition zone at this site, and it's not really applicable for something here in Florida, though we do have some transition zones in the northern part of the state, we transitioned into fracturing, right? That weathered or semi-consolidated rock, or even saprolite for some of us in the room that we deal with, that acts a lot more like a clay. So the radial co-mixing that we did at this site in the upper intervals starts to trend much more into consolidated or clay-like fracturing. All right, so step 3, logistical challenges, utility map, overheads inside, we dealt with a lot. I think our GPR contractor loved us by the end of it. I might have put 2 of his kids through college. So it was a bit of a mess. New construction in yellow, we also had a second story to deal with, so at times there were cranes and low overheads in sight. We had to use a limited access sonic rig for some of the interior drilling, which was not part of the overburden unit here, but was used for some of the transition and bedrock work, which is not shown here on this as well. We also had historical infrastructure that may or may not have been marked on maps just due to the age of the site. I mentioned the low height clearances, and then obviously numerous overhead utilities, especially running along the road. And then the last wrinkle here, it didn't really affect us because we weren't using cranes, but there was also a small municipal airport to the north here. So you had, airplane traffic as well. So you got it all going on at this site. All right, so I mentioned we're injecting slurry. So again, this process is a little different than using traditional DPT injection or injection wells for something that's aqueous or liquid or even micronized. It's called colloidal even. What we're talking about here is overlapping and interleaving injections. So I said all our injections earlier were spaced 2 feet apart vertically. The adjacent injection is offset by a foot if we're doing these on 2-foot injections vertically. Okay, and we do all these top down because of the nature of the slurry, right? We want to create the least preferential pathway for the material to move, so hopefully it always moves laterally outward. That's why we do it in, again, top down 2-foot sections. I told you we were doing some really tight injections inside. One of the interesting things about being at a small, roughly 38-person company, 40-person company, depending on the year, is when your president's kids are all out of college and on their own, he can't stop from going back out in the field. So getting his hands dirty there in the middle, that's our president, Dwayne Guilfoyle, who I think probably by the end of this year, I'll award him a PGG, even he's a PE, pretty good geologist, I think is what we're going to call him, because he wants to be called Dr. Groundwater, because I don't think I'm going to give him that one, but I think I'll give him a PGG. But couldn't keep himself out of the field, always willing to help out. So we did some really strange, maybe less common injections and things you don't normally inject in at most of our sites. Parking lot's pretty typical. And then we also dealt with, and it might have actually been during this picture, just down the hallway through that blue door. It's actually a blue door and then a blue concrete block room. They were doing second story demolition and refurbishment, which we had to always be aware of. I mentioned we need high energy injections because this is a true slurry. Again, this is our Gen 4 trail where we're actually on Gen 5. I mentioned we use a various types of injection probes to drive our rods. The rods are pre-strung, so we're not waiting to stack rods. We're just literally sliding it next on to the rack. The hose goes through it directly down the subsurface. So we're not really limited with slurry injections on how much we can batch per day. We're really limited by how much we can advance vertically per day. So however much I can probe a day is how much I can move. VFD controls give us a lot of pressure, or a lot of control over pressure and flow rates, which are good for heterogeneous sites. It's also good for sites that are coarse or sandy or gravelly, glacial till, things like that, because we really have to ramp up the pressures quickly. You can't initiate a slurry injection slowly, right? You have to have a surge of pressure. There, I can snap now, to get that radial co-mixing started immediately. That reduces formational straining. Obviously, safety is paramount. We've got whip checks and safety bypass valves. Okay, let's look at some of these results. So earlier I told you that we were going to start with the chlorinated solvents. Here we are looking at some significant concentrations here. We're talking ppm levels where we do get the primary compound of concern absorbed and degraded, but then we also get the daughter products managed as well. Probably not the best examples. These are a little more rapid than we would expect in some of these areas. These are in the tertiary shallow overburden wells. I thought animations might show a little better. So here's TCE in shallow. So this is the start of characterization. We add some wells. additional resolution because of some wells added by the road. Now, we've already started injecting in several of these areas, so our initial concentrations drop rapidly. So you see that initial red bloom and pop, and then it goes away. We were adding wells in some areas where we'd started remediation already. All right, I think the next one is similar. So this one will look a little bit more interesting because obviously doing a biodegradation on activated carbon, we are going to generate a little bit more of this intermediary. Okay, word I didn't hit play there. So again, resolution changes as we add additional wells to the northeast. I need to add like music to these slides or something. In my head, I thought it would go a little differently when I put them into the presentation. You know, like, yeah. I guess I find it more interesting than it is to most people. Or it's just a pretty picture. And then VC, right, the one that's always the most problematic child out of all these. Again, we did not bio-augment here, so we are getting VC degradation based upon the embellishment or enhancement of the native bacteria. Similar concept though. You can kind of see the active area here in the eastern part of the site with those tank and storage silos. Okay, we can stop that now. Similar graphs here for the intermediate groundwater. I don't know, I'm like, how much time do I expend on this? Like, I'm burning clock here. If you really want to see that, I'll send you the files. I'm just proud because I can't do that. I have to hire someone to do that for me. The graph on the right here, a little more indicative, right, of what we would see with, again, that compression of the ERD signature onto the activated carbon. I'll skip these. The intermediate, I probably should have just gone right with these. The intermediate, there is more impact, so it's a little more interesting. I'll just do TC, we'll move on if it plays. There we go. So this was really where the bulk of the heavy lifting for the product occurred. These were the higher loadings of the CAT 100. This is where the samples came back, either with visual-free product in them. We obviously had a PID, but chlorinated site PID lies to you half the time anyway, if not all the time. A little more interesting there. You can see the plume shrinking, which again, this was great because again, going back to our performance-based criteria here, our performance-based goals, this TCE was our primary target to hit. So seeing these shrink the plume was obviously one of the most important goals for this project. All right, moving on. All right, getting to some of the other parts of this contract. So we also had to do some absorption of PFAS. Again, we are not treating PFAS here. This is just direct absorption using the carbon component of the product. The initial post-injections, we saw about 50% to 60%. Again, these are averages you see at the bottom of the slide, so some were higher, some were lower. There is currently still, even at that, certainly here, but also still going on, there is co-competition, right? There's only so much activated carbon space in the subsurface. As we degrade more of those CVOCs and there's more availability on the activated carbon to absorb some of these, we expect these PFAS numbers to increase. But again, they were looking, for some reductions, they thought 50% plus was great. We're happy with it too. They've trended higher now. 1,4-dioxane was similar. We saw almost a 50% reduction at that point as well. We're trending closer to 80-85% at this point in the project, but the initial reductions after 8 months were about 50%. So in conclusion here, again, we entered into a performance-based contract with a very complex site, not just from geology, but from an impacts. We met our performance-based objectives for the shallow and intermediate groundwater in 12 months. Again, we're doing phase 2 out there right now, which involves more work in that transition and bedrock zone. In terms of the product, the selection and the dosages have been well matched. The stoichiometric work we did with the RDC samples, both soil and groundwater, ended up trending into our design, which has, again, resulted in not just favorable groundwater results to date, but also meeting our target objectives. And then again, the co-sequestration of PFAS. And I will mention degradation of 1,4-dioxane. There is in the bacteriological mix that we used at this site, there are 1,4-dioxane degraders in that mix as well. So we will see not just absorption, but also some degradation. So, thank you.
Well, Derek, I'll say congratulations. You're the first person in the history of presentations to get those animations to work, so well done. So we're going to pivot now to the questions I know that everyone's anxiously been holding from the beginning, so thank you for that. We do have plenty of time, so let's get those going. I do want to put in a plug for the raffle that's coming up. We're going to have our poster reception in the exhibit hall, and at 6:30 they'll be doing the drawing for the 50/50 raffle. So if you saw the bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, the 20-year, so you can get your ticket. I'm not sure, is Jean in here? Maybe we'll come in later and you can tell us where we can get our tickets and stuff, unless somebody else knows, but I'm sure they're all over there. But anyway, let's begin with our questions. Raise your hand, please, and we got a mic that we can bring around. So.
Brian Moore with Ph.D. Question for Michael. You talked, I don't know if I missed it, you talked a lot about the retention time for the SRS. Do you have an answer, like how long you think that lasts on average?
Is this on? Yeah. It's going to last probably 5 years, maybe up to 7.
What's funding the work on the nutrients? Are these state funds in terms of addressing eutrophication in these water bodies? Is that what's supporting all this?
Most of these projects were funded by either EPA or by the cities themselves. So each city is looking for, some way to address the nitrate contamination. So a lot of the money came from the cities themselves.
Over here.
Hey, this question was for Merrilee. You said that one of the problems that we've had is always estimating how much you're actually going to excavate and anticipating that there's going to be maybe a change when you're actually doing it. And you said you actually had to use clean fill to make your final elevation grade. Was there any opportunity for you to actually change the design so you didn't have to do that?
We actually asked that question in the field because bringing in a bunch of clean fill is expensive to bring up CAMU up to grade, but the way the stormwater system was designed, the way the ditches were designed, the way the CAMU having to be above the water table design, it would have been a lot more costly to change it. And then we would have had to go through a RCRA wrap permit change as well. Didn't really want to spend, 2 to 3 months trying to get that done. We just were trying to get off the site. But it was a surprise when we got out there and we couldn't fill it up the way we wanted to. But that's the way things go, I guess.
Hey, Derek, I like the animations. Keep them in there.
Good, I spent a lot of time.
Yeah. Your time wasn't wasted. The high-resolution characterization, the whole project had to be quite expensive from all those borings, I imagine. Be interested in the cost. But what did you use for your high-resolution? Like, did you use downhole tools for, like, MIPS probes or something for the analytical you got every 2 feet, every foot? Or labs, Tell us a little bit more about how you did all that and what software you used for processing all that data.
Sure. Sorry. Hello, everybody. Derek's back. I'll start with the software. So the software we used was a software that we developed with our European partner. It's called Environmental Site Manager, or ESM. It's very similar to Rockworks. It has some components that are similar to GIS. Everything can be geotagged, geolocated. When we start at most of our sites these days, whether it's a large site like that or it's even just a corner gas station or a strip mall dry cleaner, we preload our injection tablets, which monitor the injectate distribution, the pressures, all the things you want to know at the end of the project as a client on what we did. We preload that into the tablet, so every time we do an injection, it records it in real time, and we can follow it. The precursor to all that is what you saw in those remedial design characterization, so when we entered into this performance-based contract, the manufacturer, RPI, operates a laboratory in Golden, Colorado, where they run the soil and groundwater pro bono. So it's not necessarily if you're going to use their product that's available to you. You can use it in the RDC phase as well. But in support of us going into that contract with their product, they analyzed all of those soil and groundwater samples pro bono for that site. So that cut down a lot on our client's cost as well. The HRSC, there was actually no tooling used at this site for HRSC in our phase. In previous iterations of evaluation and characterization, yes, that there had been some sparingly used. We're not against using HRSC, but a tool is a tool, right? It's still an interpretation of an output. It's not true wet chemistry. So what I like to use it for is I like to say, look, if you have a big sandbox and you don't know where you want to go yet, or you kind of have an idea of where you need to go, you use that to tighten the box up, and then you go in with, wet chemistry samples, get what you need from the RDC. That's probably the best way to refine, and that's regardless of what you're spending on soil groundwater, right? That's just to refine and optimize your cost overall. So I kind of use that up front if I can, and then I get in and we look at using the laboratory samples, whether it's pro bono or not.
Your injection rig tracks the depth and the volume you're injecting everywhere, or that's something you manually track and enter into your iPad?
There are some inputs that have to be manually done on the tablet, but some of the parameters can be tracked in real time.
Okay, cool.
And then I don't have it in this presentation, but basically what the client's output is you get, and it's not a true cylinder, but it shows up as a cylinder in the software, right? Each injection builds a disc, and if for some reason there's refusal or geologic or anthropological condition where we can't inject in that interval, you see no disc. Or if it's a partial injection, it's a part of a pie chart on that disc.
Oh.
And so as you work through, and some sites they ask us for it daily, weekly, whatever. You can see it progress over time, but we do that because that's the number one thing clients ask us is where did the injectate go? Because there have been in our history of this industry, it all went in the ground, right? But where did it go? So.
Excellent. And the total cost?
I don't know if I'm at liberty to, no. I can tell you that for phase one, the all-in costs for that were probably somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 million.
Well, we don't want to let Brett off the hook, so I got a question for you. So you had mentioned gravity feed, I think, for your reagents. Is that right? For one of them. Can you explain the choice to do that and why not use active pumping, and then how you ensure that you're getting good equal distribution of that reagent?
I may defer to my engineer for a second.
I knew you had a support crew up here. So.
No, that was the purpose for the vertical injection wells. We could do that. The idea of the lateral was to get more spread. As you can see, they were spread further away across. And also any extra that may have been left. Did I answer that right, Jim? Okay.
Get the nod. All right. Oh, Mr. Jim.
Hey, Derek. On your presentation on the time series maps, which I like, thank you. The time series maps for soil, each of those time series, obviously groundwater, it's easy, right? You're just going back out and resampling monitoring wells. But with the soils data you were presenting, what was that? Were you literally having to go back out and punch soil cores at a whole set location and then going back and redoing them? Just kind of curious how you were collecting the soils for the time series maps.
So that's a good clarification, and apologies if I didn't make that clear. All the time lapse, well, the ones I didn't show even as well, but the time lapse we did show, all that is groundwater. So we're doing all that monitoring through groundwater. The last soil data I showed you was in the cross sections. That was from the remedial design characterization phase. After we injected, we're only using groundwater to monitor the performance of the product in situ right now. We're not concerned at this site with the soil concentrations. We're only required to evaluate the performance based on groundwater concentration.
Okay, thank you. That makes a heck of a lot more sense.
Yeah, that would bust that estimate I just handed out a few minutes ago. Sorry for the confusion.
Dr. Mike, so you did multiple buffering agents, right? And then you did sodium bicarbonate and the calcium. Was there a reason you went one way or the other? I know you mentioned about solubility, longer lasting and that, but it seemed to change with different sites.
I think it depends on the groundwater pH and also, what reagent we wanted to try to evaluate. So, the sodium carbonate, bicarbonate, it's going to be much more soluble. It's going to distribute further, but it's probably not going to last as long as like the calcium carbonate. So a lot of situations we're going to do both. One to try to bring the pH up initially, and then the calcium carbonate to maintain it.
Any other questions out there? Going once? Twice? All right. Well, let's give a hand to our panel again. All right, well, we are off to the reception, so